Ever wondered what it would be like if you got teleported to a new dimension while going to the market? I'm sure you didn't, but Subaru sure does, as he gets himself teleported into another world just like that. This video is sponsored by NordVPN. As anime fans, it's no secret that we often have to face the consistently annoying problem of jumping from one streaming site to another just so we can watch this interesting anime that's recently caught our attention. There are plenty of hurdles, but the most frustrating one of them is the regional restrictions. Now, in case you're unaware, VPNs allow you to virtually switch your location to whatever country you want. What does this mean? Well, you can essentially get free access to all the anime, TV shows, movies, whatever, that are available to watch on sites like Netflix in other countries, but not yours. This way you can bypass the regional restrictions with no effort at all, and even enjoy anime that's only available in streaming sites in Japan. Not only that, NordVPN also ensures protection of your data while you're online. And in today's cyber world, it's not just a luxury, but a necessity that each and every one of us should have. Plus, it also comes with a 30-day zero-risk money-back guarantee. So, why wait? Check out nordvpn.com/AnyRecaps for the first 30 days. You have everything to gain and nothing to lose. Try it out. The link will be in the description box down below, and also it supports the channel. So with that, let's get right into the video. He isn't welcome to this world with a red carpet, as he soon finds himself being attacked by 3 hoodlums. Luckily, a half-elf girl comes to his rescue. The girl realizes that Subaru isn't even aware of the basics of this world. He doesn't understand the most basic of stuff like history, geography, and language. Eventually, the girl introduces herself as Stella, along with her champion, Puck. Subaru feels like he needs to return the favor since Satella helped her so much. He decides to help her catch the thief that stole her insignia. They follow the thief to the loot house, only to find the thief dead. Shortly after they enter, before they could even understand what was going on, they were killed as well. However, the story doesn't end here, as Subaru's special ability, Return by Death, activates. He finds himself back to the point when he first arrived in this world. After being revived, he decides to dash towards the loot house. He sees Felt and Rom and tries to convince them to give him the insignia in exchange for his phone. The camera feature of the phone was pretty valuable, so both of them agreed to it. However, Subaru makes the mistake of revealing what he intends to do with the insignia. He says that he wants to return it to the original owner. Hearing this, Elsa kills Subaru for the second time. Subaru respawns in the world for the 3rd time, and this time he decides to meet up with Satella first, though he ends up making the mistake of addressing her with this name. After calling her Satella, the half-elf girl is seriously offended. She says that Satella is the name of a witch, and after being offended, she leaves him. Subaru tries to prevent the insignia from being stolen, however he fails at that too, and ultimately ends up being killed by the hoodlums this time around. After being revived again, he decided to completely rethink his plan. This time around, he decides not to meet Satella at all. He would try to buy the insignia from Felt before she could come in contact with Elsa. He's saved in the alley from the 3 hoodlums by Reinhard. He tells Reinhard to stop Satella from coming to the loot house. He goes to the loot house himself to offer Felt his camera in exchange for the insignia. However, things don't go as planned, since Felt wants to meet up with Elsa first to compare her offerings with what Subaru had to offer. This completely messes with his plan, as if Elsa arrives, history has taught him that it usually ends up with him dying. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. Subaru is worried that it might be Elsa. However, it ends up being Satella behind the door. Satella and Puck quickly gain the upper hand by using their ice magic, although nighttime strikes as they're fighting, and Puck ends up having to return to his monocrystal as he loses his ability to fight in the real world during nighttime. Felt gets her chance to flee, leaving the wounded Rom, and Elsa arrives to engage in battle with Satella, causing Satella to wear all her stamina off. Eventually, Reinhard joins the battle. He takes on Elsa and uses his Van Astera sword technique that puts Elsa to rest. However, Elsa is quite the tough opponent. She ends up getting back on her feet and aims an attack straight at Satella. However, Subaru takes the blow instead of her. As he collapses, he asks Satella for her real name, and at his request, she tells him that her real name is actually Amelia. Reinhard is a kind person and initially wants to let Felt off the hook. However, after realizing that it was a crime that involves an insignia, he feels the moral obligation to arrest Felt despite being off duty. He tells Amelia about how her life will never be the same. She could be summoned at any moment, so she should be prepared. After a long slumber, Subaru wakes up at Roswell's mansion. He quickly realizes that all his wounds have been healed and he has Amelia to thank for it. He wanders along the hallway for a while and ends up coming across Beatrice. She ends up draining her mana, causing him to fall unconscious. Much sooner than later, he meets with Roswaal. He tells Subaru how the insignia is a vital thing required for Emilia to be qualified for the next monarch in the upcoming royal election. Since Subaru has nowhere to go, he requests to be assigned as a butler in the mansion. Naturally, it's a mansion, so he has a hard time keeping up with things on his first day. He has to go to a nearby village to buy some supplies, and he decides to enjoy himself a bit as well by playing with the kids. He asks Emilia to go on a date with him to the same village, and she ends up agreeing. However, Subaru ends up waking in the exact place at the palace. He realizes that he must have died on a date with Emilia, but can't remember exactly how, making it difficult for him to decide his next move. The next thing he decides to do is figure out a plan to understand what's going on. He starts by doing exactly what he had done in the previous timeline. Subaru simply wishes to understand the events a lot better this time around, so he could catch the cause of his death, or better yet, prevent it altogether. He's obviously more cautious as he takes each step now. He does chores from the mansion and forms a stronger bond with Rem. This partially bothers Ram, but not too much. Rem goes shopping with Subaru, eventually where Rem talks about how loyal she is to Ram. Eventually, Emilia ends up having to teach Subaru how to read and write. Just like the last time, this gives Subaru the opening to ask her out to the village. That night, he finds himself unable to sleep as he keeps thinking about what he has to fix and what actually went wrong. He eventually dozes off, however, and he wakes up in the middle of the night feeling severely ill. Out of desperation, he drags his body across the mansion in hope of some help. Although it doesn't go as planned, since he's killed by a sharp assassin out of nowhere. He wakes up again in the room with all his wounds healed for the third time. This time he has a lot more info and wishes to change the timeline even more dramatically to prevent his death. He now knows that he has 4 days before the assassin executes him, so he plans accordingly. This time around, he chooses the guest role in the mansion. He also asks about killing tips from Beatrice just so that he can defend himself from the assassin. Beatrice proposes 2 best ways. One is to use a curse, and the next best way is to drain mana, though the latter is something only Beatrice and Puck could do. Subaru has a little chat with Ram about a folktale. Ram tells him that once a blue dragon sacrificed its reputation by healing a red dragon. According to the moral of the story, both these dragons were fooled. According to Subaru, the moral of the story is completely wrong, and Ram ends up agreeing. Subaru decides to bring up another folklore about the Dragon Kingdom and the Release Witch. Ram feels uncomfortable discussing this story and refuses to talk about it any further. Time flies by and the 4th day finally arrives. This time around, Subaru decides to leave the entire mansion completely, hoping that this would catch the assassins off guard. This way just might give him some extra info too, even if he dies. Although things don't go in his best interest as he gets attacked by a heavy spiked ball along with a chain out of nowhere. He manages to evade it using the best of his abilities, but what he sees next actually shocks him. He realizes that his assassins were none other than Ram and Rem the entire time. They think that Subaru might be one of the people secretly against Emilia. He gets killed this time around as well. Subaru rests one more time and finds himself in the same bed with his wounds healed. Out of desperation, he tries to tell Emilia about the return by death, but just as he speaks, a black shadow with hands overwhelms him. In this timeline, Beatrice also says that he has a strong scent of a witch coming from him. He begs for his safety on the soon-to-be date of assassination, to which Beatrice agrees. This time around, he actually gets through the night safely. However, he witnesses the death of Rem the next morning, leaving Ram in tears. Ram naturally suspects Subaru to be the suspect and makes an attack on him. Beatrice decides to defend Subaru because of the contract they made. Subaru ends up deciding to jump off a nearby cliff, hoping to revive himself in the past again. This time he's more determined than ever to change the timeline in a way that's better for everyone. This time he decides to work as a butler again and learns how to use magic from Puck. He realizes that gaining the trust of the made twins, Rem and Ram, is the most important thing. It's the one that will change the timeline for the better. His mana type seems to be a shadow. He realizes Emilia's intention regarding the royal elections. She actually wishes to be excluded from them. Since he's trying his best this time, he gets overworked and ends up sleeping on Emilia's lap out of both exhaustion and desperation. He even cries in her lap before finally dozing off to sleep. He becomes very passionate about curses as well. He wakes up in the middle of the night just to talk to Beatrice about curses. The next day, he wakes up with a glimmer of hope and enthusiasm. He invites the twin mates to the village with himself, a thing which he didn't do in the previous timeline. The twins, Rem and Ram, decide to go to the village with him. Subaru visits the village with Ram and Rem with the purpose of finding the culprit when the puppy bites him again. In this timeline, things change. This time, Roswaal leaves for the night, something that didn't happen in the previous timeline. Subaru meets up with Beatrice, who confirms Subaru's suspicion of being cursed. They trace the curse back to the dog that bit him. They have a jaw-dropping realization that the children back at the mansion are now in danger. They rush back to the mansion only to realize that the children have gone missing. They venture on their search for the children in a nearby forest and quickly come across all of the children but one. Unfortunately, they're all bitten by the dog. Rem gets busy healing the children, and Subaru makes the hasty decision of searching for the final child all by himself. Though Subaru gets attacked by a mad beast, thanks to his training in this timeline, he overcomes the adversary easily. However, he soon finds himself surrounded by even more mad beasts. They're all being controlled by the same demon puppy that bit the children. Rem sees that there's no easy way out of this situation. She ends up releasing the beast inside of her, only at the price of going completely berserk. Seeing as how Rem was about to be killed out of the goodness of his nature, Subaru decides to take the attack in her place. However, when he wakes up in the mansion, he realizes that time hasn't really reset, meaning he never died. He learns that just in the nick of time, Amelia and Rem came to the rescue. The barrier around the village ends up being restored to prevent any further mad beast from attacking. Although Subaru did survive, he did so with a lot of curses, and Beatrice has a hard time removing all of them before they could take effect. Subaru has no choice but to take on the beast himself to lift the curse. He goes in search of the puppy alongside Ram to put it to rest. He's shocked to hear that Ram isn't as strong as Rem and isn't nearly as reliable. They end up coming across a large number of mad beasts and the berserk Rem. They quickly come up with a plan to hit Rem's horn in order to get her back to being normal. It's revealed that in the past, Ram and Rem were born in a demon village. Ram was always the talented prodigy, and Rem seemed to lag behind in most cases. Although Ram soon had her horns cut off by the witch, making her the weaker one now. Rem actually blames herself for this tragedy, even though she shouldn't. Eventually, they find a way to get Rem back to normal. They make an escape from the remaining mad beast, but end up coming across the puppy they originally came to slay. Subaru tries stabbing the puppy with his broken sword, although it doesn't work at all, and just as Subaru is about to be killed, Roswaal comes out of nowhere to kill the remaining mad beasts. This also removes all the curses on Subaru. Subaru wakes up in the mansion again and he meets Rem. They both have a conversation and Subaru tells her to live life without regretting the past. What happened to Ram wasn't her fault and she should now focus on living her life instead. This empathetic advice causes Rem to fall in love with Subaru. However, Subaru still has his sights set on Amelia, as he asks her on a date to the village that very night. 1 week after the incident, Amelia gets called to the capital. Subaru decides to tag along and both of them are escorted by Wilhelm and Felix. Both of them meet Julius, and Julius decides to kiss Amelia's hand, which made Subaru a bit jealous. Subaru witnesses the same 3 hoodlums he came across when he first came to this world. However, this time around, they're not after him. They're after Priscilla. Instinctively, he goes to her rescue, but the hoodlums end up running away as they saw Ram appear. Even though Amelia is a great friend of Subaru at this point in the story, she still requests that he doesn't set foot in the castle where the elections of the royal candidates were about to be held. However, despite being told not to, he still sneaks into the castle as Priscilla's manservant. Amelia gets seated with all the other candidates, and Reinhard finally introduces the final candidates, and this catches everyone off guard. The 5th and final candidate is actually Felt. This raises a weird tension in the entire room, as Felt is just another girl from the slums. Both nobles and the Imperial Knights clearly have a problem with her. Abruptly, Felt simply declares that she won't be taking part in the elections and starts insulting the other candidates. She also insults Amelia for her half-elf nature. This infuriates Subaru from a distance and he introduces himself as Amelia's knight. This introduction of Subaru was offensive to Julius, since Julius is Emma's official knight in the ceremony. Naturally, out of anger, Julius challenges Subaru to a battle. As you'd expect, since Julius is far more experienced than Subaru, the battle ends up being one-sided, and Subaru does sustain some pretty bad injuries, but nothing too serious, as the swords they used were wooden ones. Subaru ends up having to stay in the capital since he isn't fit for travel, although Amelia ends up proposing that she should leave for the mansion and Subaru should recover. Although Subaru isn't very happy with the idea, as he wants to be with Amelia at all times. He has developed a tight bond with her and wants to protect her. Amelia started to become skeptical of Subaru's intentions. She begins to think that as a half-elf, she doesn't deserve any love. The reason Subaru must be helping him is that he probably has some ulterior intentions. This infuriates Subaru as he's been trying to help Emilia ever since he got into this world. He ends up trying to explain the time leap he goes through every time he dies, but of course Emilia doesn't really understand any of that. Emilia decides to end their friendship in a really emotional state. Subaru stays at the Karsten mansion to recover from his injuries, and after losing that battle to Julius, he realizes how weak he truly is. He decides to train obsessively with Wilhelm von Astrea. However, he doesn't show any talent and doesn't improve that much at all. Reinhard comes to Subaru and apologizes to him about how Julius behaved. He wished for Subaru to forget about the past and make friends with Julius. However, Subaru, being in a pretty bad mood of recent events, passes up the offer. Subaru and Rem meet a vendor who thinks that all people will not support Emilia because of her ties with the jealous witch. At dinner, Felix advises Subaru to rebuild his ties with Emilia. Through Rem's connection with Ram, she figures out that something odd is happening in Roswaal's domain. Both Rem and Subaru decide to leave for Roswaal's mansion. However, as they were on a stop at a hotel, Ram leaves behind Subaru for his safety. However, Subaru soon learns this and orders a cart driver to lead him to the mansion. The cart driver's name is Otto, and his ground dragon refuses to travel at nightfall. Subaru has no choice but to walk his way to the mansion, despite knowing all the odds that he's going to face on the way there. Even though he has to go through hell to reach the mansion, he eventually does. But what he witnesses shocks him to the very core. Firstly, he witnesses the dead body of Rem. Soon after, as if the shock wasn't enough, Subaru also witnesses tons of other dead bodies. Most of them were the children he once saved. Before he could interrogate any further, he discovers a cold room and freezes himself to death. He resets himself into a new timeline where he sees Rem while standing in front of a vendor. In the previous timeline, he witnesses her dead body, which completely twists his mental state. Abruptly, he rushes towards Rem and hugs her. The people around him start to think of him as insane, as it's not something anyone would do out of the blue. Rem and Subaru decide to go home. However, this time around, they end up running into an ambush. Subaru ends up being chained up and trapped. He eventually meets their leader, Petalgaz, and his men. They torture Rem and leave Subaru to die. Rem has a little bit of strength in her, and she uses it to cut Subaru's chain. She confesses her feelings for Subaru and tells him to live on. Subaru's heart is torn once again after having to relive the death of her dear friend Ram. He decides to take the dead body of Rem to the mansion, only to find the dead body of Ram as well, and beside her dead body stood Puck. He decapitates Subaru's head as soon as he shows up. The first thing Subaru does after his revival this time is to curse the Petalgazes, as he knows that they're going to attack the mansion in 3 days' time. He's quite desperate as he has no clue how to stop it. He starts by asking for the help of Church, but that turns out to be futile. Not only did she not believe a single word Subaru said, but she also told Subaru that she had nothing to obtain by saving her rival. He resorts to Priscilla, and she says that she'll only help if Subaru licks her foot. Being an idiot, Subaru does exactly that, only to listen from Priscilla that she was joking. However, this behavior of Subaru spoke to Priscilla that Subaru lacks loyalty to Emilia. A disloyal person is someone Priscilla would never help. He also approaches Anastasia, but that doesn't work out either. Subaru deduces that none of these people have a kind heart that's going to help him out. He gives up his search for help and decides to rush towards the mansion with Rem and Otto's wagon. The wagon eventually comes across a fog where they encounter a giant white whale. It's the same creature that forced them to adjust their path in the previous timeline. Rem decides to sacrifice herself in order to protect Subaru and Otto so they might make it to the mansion. The white whale, however, still doesn't leave their pursuit, and Subaru realizes that it's actually a mad beast and is attracted to him. Knowing this, Otto decides to push Subaru out of the wagon and it nearly kills him, but he ends up surviving. He crosses paths with Subaru again and goes to the mansion with him. Subaru finds himself waking up in the mansion with a dizzy memory of what had happened. He wakes up realizing that Emilia has healed. Subaru proceeds to mention how Rem sacrificed herself for Subaru to reach the mansion, but Emilia has no memory of a person named Rem, nor does Ram herself. Frustrated by this, he decides to tell Emilia about the return by death ability, but in the heat of the moment, no one really understands what Subaru is talking about. Before he could explain things properly, everything just goes dark, and suddenly he finds Emilia dead. Out of nowhere, Beatrice appears in the mansion, and she teleports both Emilia and Subaru outside the mansion. There we witness Puck killing all the members of Petalgaz. He then proceeds to free Subaru for letting Emilia die. Time resets once again, and by this time Subaru had completely lost it. He didn't know what to do to prevent the adversary to come. This return by death is turning out to be more of a curse than a blessing. The despair-ridden Subaru is reset back to the vendor. Rem couldn't help but notice a change in his behavior. Subaru quickly pulls Ram aside to explain things to her. Looking more desperate and weird than ever, Subaru asks Rem to run away with him to the mansion. However, Rem gets freaked out because of the desperation in Subaru's voice. She says that she'll follow only the real Subaru who she understands, and not the current one in front of her. Subaru has no choice but to express all of his emotions in front of Rem. He tells her how his entire life he's been a worthless person who couldn't stand up for the people he cares about. Now more than ever, he wants to prevent a tragedy from happening. He wants to save Emilia from the tragedy that awaits her in the mansion. This touches Rem on a deeper level, and she decides to move on with Subaru. Winning Rem's trust lends Subaru the enthusiasm he needed to devise a plan against the problem at hand. In this timeline, he decides to change his approach entirely. In the previous ones, his main goal was to somehow dodge the white whale and rush to the mansion. However, this time around, he decides to take the white whale head-on. Subaru offers Crush's camp an alliance to battle the white whale in exchange for shared mining rights of the magic stones in Roswaal's domain. Anastasia's camp also thought it to be in their benefit to help defeat the white whale. Wilhelm also happens to be a guy who has a personal grudge against the white whale. His wife was killed by the white whale, and ever since then, he has devoted his life to defeating the beast one day. Obviously, he's the most dedicated to Subaru at this point. Together with the entire cavalry this time, Subaru heads to the Flugel tree and waits for the white whale to attack them. The white whale tries to ambush them at the exact time Subaru said it would, and the fierce battle starts. Subaru and Rem try their best to lead the whale towards the army they had of Anastasia and Crush. Meanwhile, Wilhelm furiously starts striking the whale with his blade, hoping for it to come crashing down. However, this doesn't seem to be very effective, as the whale is still pretty much airborne. The whale ends up releasing a fog that erases everyone's existence provided they get in its vicinity. Thankfully, they were able to dodge it. Wilhelm and Ricardo fight furiously against the white whale, hoping to get rid of it forever, though nothing they do seems to have any effect. Wilhelm ends up being swallowed, whereas Ricardo ends up being badly injured. As the fog clears, the army witnesses 2 more whales appear out of the blue. They're already losing the battle as it is, and witnessing one more of these creatures only dampened their hopes of victory furthermore. Subaru notices something strange about the way these whales are fighting. He notices that one of the whales is staying back and is on the defensive, which would mean that defeating that whale is the most important thing for them at the moment. Together with the help of Rem, Subaru finds a way to trap that whale by making a tree fall on it. This gives Wilhelm the opportunity to kill the whale with a barrage of slashes from his mighty sword. He slices the whale like butter, avenging the death of his beloved wife. Killing this whale led the remaining 2 to disappear as well. Anastasia is very impressed with Subaru's courage and strength, so she leads him with further reinforcements to fight off the evil about to attack the mansion. They eventually start their attack on the Petalgaz. This time around, Subaru has a lot of help, so they defeat Petalgaz. However, Petalgaz's soul is still present in one of the fingers who attacks, using unseen hands to kill some of the band and capture Subaru. Fortunately, the finger is distracted by a tiny spirit, and Wilhelm kills her and rescues Subaru. Subaru is upset at his critical mistake, which allowed soldiers to die, but Wilhelm tells him to keep fighting. A slight misunderstanding occurs, and Ram ends up attacking Subaru. To the best of her knowledge, Subaru had abandoned Emilia, although luckily the misunderstanding was cleared up. They all focus on evacuating the villagers. While they are evacuating people, they come across a merchant who was on the witch's side. He ends up blowing himself up to knock out Subaru. Subaru wakes up only to realize that the witch herself is attacking the mansion. The Archbishop of Sloth's power has the ability to be transferred, and it is divided amongst the merchants. Eventually, things end up out of hand, and nothing was going according to the way that Subaru had intended. Subaru requests his allies to kill him, so he could change the timeline. That way he'd be able to devise a better plan this time around. He resets to the strategy meeting he took with the army after they had defeated the white whale. This time he knows well that the cult can possess others. In his new strategy, he decides to take out all the potential fingers before going after Petalgaz himself. This time Subaru convinces Emilia to escape with him. However, the key thing that's different in this plan is that he spread rumors about Emilia's evacuation 2 hours after the designated time. This way, the merchants that are spies will have false information to act on. Eventually, he has Mimi and Tivi take care of all the fingers, whereas Subaru takes Petalgaz to a cliff. Julius arrives to aid Subaru and fight with Petalgaz. Petalgaz has no choice but to attempt to take control of Subaru's body once again. However, this time, Subaru speaks out, returned by death, to have Petalgaz come in contact with the spirit of Satella. Eventually, this causes Petalgaz to lose control over Subaru, and then finally, Petalgaz gets killed. Subaru soon learns that there are explosives in the wagon carrying Emilia. He rushes towards the van, however, he has another thing to worry about as Petalgaz makes a surprising comeback. Luckily, Subaru managed to make short work of him by using using Julius's spirit. Realizing that he's short on time, he rushes towards Amelia and manages to reach the wagon on time. He gets the explosives and manages to throw them away deep in the woods. He does get close to the vicinity of the explosion. However, he's saved thanks to his dragon. He later wakes up in Amelia's arms. Emilia thanks him for saving her, and Subaru finally confesses his love for her. Amelia ends up tearing up and thanks Subaru for saving her. And that's the end of the video. As always, if you liked what you saw, subscribe to the channel. I'll be uploading a lot of videos just like this, so I'll see you at the next one.